When we look at the epidemic in the entire country, we find that in those provinces where we know the new variant is common, that the epidemic is spreading faster than it ever did in the first wave. In KwaZulu-Natal, the epidemic is spreading at a very rapid rate, so much so that it's almost twice as fast now than it was in the peak of the first wave. That leads to a situation where the healthcare services are in a dire position. The number of cases are coming in rapidly, the patients are coming in needing hospital care all at the same time. So the services get overwhelmed. Pressure is put on the healthcare system. Pressure is put on oxygen, on ventilators, on the availability of beds. All of that is what we are grappling with in KwaZulu-Natal right now. This is a situation that we've already been through in the Eastern Cape and the Western Cape. It's now in KwaZulu-Natal. Gauteng will follow. When we look at the initial epidemics in the Eastern Cape and the Western Cape, for the first few cases that were occurring in the second wave, they were predominantly other variants. But because of the nature of this variant and the fact that it was present in some of our super spreading events that we saw in about October, November, that they served to spread this new variant. And so by the time we got to the epidemics really starting to increase, the new variant, the 501v2 variant, rapidly became dominant. So that by the time we went to the beginning of November, a large proportion, more than half of all the viruses spreading in the Western Cape, Eastern Cape, and indeed in KwaZulu-Natal, were becoming this new 501v2 variant. So until the end of October, we had 35 different variations of the virus. And they were all spreading throughout South Africa at their own little pace. Enter into that situation a new variant. This new variant has evolved. We don't quite understand how, but it looks like it started in the Eastern Cape in Nelson Mandela Bay, because that's where we found the first cases. It might not have originated there, but that's where the first cases were. Into that situation, you put a variant that is spreading more efficiently. What happens is that this variant is now spreading and infecting many more people, while the other variants are only infecting a few. So when we look at a snapshot, we say, wow, a large proportion of those who are infected have this new variant. It indicates that not just that this new variant is spreading more efficiently, it was given the opportunity to spread more efficiently. And how did it spread more efficiently? We've now, from a handful of sequences from the matric rages, both in KwaZulu-Natal and elsewhere, we have now found that this new variant was present in those settings. So those super spreading events serve to amplify, give this new variant an opportunity to grow. That's a very good question. All the evidence we have so far suggests that the new variant and the COVID-19 disease that it causes is no different from the first wave and from the variants we've had before. So in other words, the clinical illness is not changing. The prevention that we use is not changing. The diagnostic tests that we use are not changing. All those things remain the same. What is different is that this new virus, this new variant of the virus, is able to spread faster. That means that hospitals get busy, they get full, pressure on the beds, and so it puts pressure on the healthcare system. The second is that this new variant also has ways in which it is able to evade immune responses, antibodies. I'll come back to that in more detail. So back in August and September, the Department of Health, together with the World Health Organization, sent us, the Ministerial Advisory Committee, a resurgence plan, how to deal with the resurgence, what markers to use, what preparations need to be done, and so we signed off on it then. So the planning for the second surge was done well in advance. What we were not planning for was a variant that would spread like this. No one could have predicted that. I think when we look at what has happened, with hindsight, maybe we should have predicted that somehow a new variant would come about. But I think we got lulled into a sense of complacency. And that complacency was, we were reading headlines that there's herd immunity. We were saying, oh, the first wave we coped with, it wasn't so bad. The second wave is not going to be so bad. But I remember making the comment at the time that when we look at countries that have experienced a first wave and a second wave, about half of the countries that had a first wave, their second wave was worse than their first wave. So there was a 50% chance. I think we hoped that that 50% wouldn't apply to us. The second wave in France is much worse than the first wave. The second wave in Spain is much worse than the first wave. The second wave in the UK is much worse than the first wave. Some of it may be due to variants. Some of it we don't fully understand. Some of it just relates to our inability to contain the epidemic when it's still at a low level. When we look at the successes of countries like South Korea, Vietnam, they never let the virus get ahead of themselves. It's very hard to do that with this new variant. South Africa needs to have some kind of endgame plan. And right now, that's still in the throes of being formed because we don't yet fully understand what vaccines are actually doing other than avoiding symptomatic disease. We don't fully appreciate the full effects of a vaccine. We know, because the trials showed us, that the number of cases of severe and mild disease decline. But we don't yet fully understand whether the vaccines prevent transmission of the virus. So if we don't know that yet, we can't really plan for an endgame. But the kind of endgame we need to be thinking about is that we need to be thinking about a situation where we have vaccinated healthcare workers, the elderly, and those with comorbidities by the end of this year. That translates into something in the order of 10 to 15 million people. If we can do that, then the pressure on the healthcare system is eased. Then we're not worried about all the healthcare workers getting sick when the cases occur. We're not worried about the elderly to the same extent. We're not worried about those with comorbidities to the same extent. So it eases the pressure on the healthcare system. We'll be able to better cope. We'll learn to live with this virus, coexist with this virus. So we need to know what our individual stages are. And the first stage is to get to a position where those who are most at risk are vaccinated. And then we need to monitor the circulating viruses to make sure that the vaccine immunity is effective. Because if it's not, we've got to change the vaccine. We've got to re-vaccinate everybody. Just think about what that means for a country where we haven't even vaccinated the whole population, and that those we have vaccinated are not protected. We want to avoid that situation. The way to do that is to be proactive, is to know your circulating strains, just like we knew in October and November that our variants were changing. Why is that important? It's important because we're trying to get to a situation where we can try and get back to as much of normality as possible with as little restrictions as possible. To do that, it means we have to have a situation where the bulk of the most risky individuals are protected. If we can do that, that will be an important first step. It's a key question. Does vaccine immunity protect us from the new variant, from the 501v2 variant? There is no evidence as up to today to suggest that vaccines don't work against this variant or that they do. What we now know is that the 3 mutations that we have seen in the receptor binding domain in the 501v2 variant that is common in South Africa is that convalescent serum, that is pre-existing natural immunity, does not seem to protect against this particular variant. Now, vaccine immunity is different from natural immunity. So it does not yet tell us if the vaccines are going to be effective or not. Fortunately, the research is already underway. We can expect within the next week or two, we will see announcements about each of the different vaccines and to see whether they are effective against the 501v2 variant. I have been personally in touch with several of the vaccine manufacturers, offering them a virus, offering to work with them to test their vaccines. And so I'm pretty optimistic we'll know this answer within the fortnight. Whether the vaccines work or not, we still need to proceed with planning for our vaccine rollout. Securing vaccine, we have to go on the best case scenario, which is that these vaccines are most likely to work. If they turn out that they don't work, we have to have a plan B, and that's what we're working on. That plan B should really be about developing a generation of vaccines or to looking for which of the many vaccines that we currently have, which of those vaccines do act against this variant. I'm actually pretty optimistic that there's at least 1 or 2 of the vaccines, especially those that use the whole virus, that those vaccines may be more beneficial in that because they generate antibodies to different parts of the virus. But it's speculation. Let's wait to get the actual evidence to know if any of these vaccines are being compromised by this new variant or whether they are able to kill this new variant. When I look at 2020, each month starting in April, I looked at how this virus was changing. My colleague, Professor Tullio de Oliveira, whose laboratory is next to mine, would bring the gene sequences and we'd look at them and we would find 1 or 2 changes each month. In fact, over the first sort of 7-8 months, this virus hardly changed. It was quite striking actually. This virus doesn't change much. There's 1 or 2 mutations at most, didn't bother us. I was lulled into a sense of this virus is stable, it's not mutating at any particular rate. We did not anticipate that come October, there would be 20 mutations in 1 month. From a situation where there's 1 or 2 mutations a month to 20 mutations in a month. That's a game changer in terms of our response. We're dealing with a different situation now. We now have an understanding that this can occur. That means we have to be ready for it to occur again and again and again. It takes us into one of two scenarios. Scenario one is where we generate a vaccine that is not affected by these mutations that are occurring. A vaccine, has been elusive in influenza. It's called a universal influenza vaccine. And we're quite close, the researchers are quite close to making such a vaccine. And we would need to look for a universal coronavirus vaccine. Not an easy task. The alternative is that we'll basically play a cat and mouse game. We have the virus transmitting, we make a vaccine that pressures it and slows it down. A virus then will escape it. We then have to make another vaccine. And we'll keep doing that. And we do that already. We do that for influenza, quite successfully actually. In that with influenza, we know that the elderly and the healthcare workers are at risk, so we vaccinate them with influenza. And the rest of us, we just sort of live with it. And I think we're probably heading to a similar situation with the coronavirus, with SARS-CoV-2, where we'll want to protect those who are most at risk with the new variants as and when they arise. And the rest of the population will have to play catch-up in due course. So if people thought 2021 was the year we'll stop wearing masks and stop our social distancing, I've got bad news. We are going to have to continue all of our prevention measures. A vaccine does not replace those. A vaccine is part and parcel of our combination approach to controlling this disease. It's a really important part. It's one of our strongest tools in the box against this virus. But it is not alone. It has to be seen in the context of all of our other tools. Why? Because we don't yet know if the vaccine stopped transmission of the virus. We don't yet know if the vaccines are going to be effective against all of the different mutations. We don't yet have a vaccine that's 100% protective. So we're going to have to use our other tools. Maybe we can relax some of those tools, but we're going to have to keep them in place at least for most, if not all, of this year. I always thought that if one got COVID, that the immune response, both in the form of antibodies and something we call T-cell immunity, that those two branches of our immune response would protect us from a subsequent virus. But now we have growing evidence to show that reinfection does occur. Doesn't seem to be occurring very commonly, but it does occur. And when it does, it can occur as severely in the second time as it did in the first time. We already have patients who've been infected in the first and second waves in South Africa, hospitalized on both occasions. So we are already seeing this. Fortunately, it seems to not be a major concern right now, but it does occur. My worry is that when we look into the future, will those who were protected, who became infected in the first wave, will they be protected months down the line? We don't know the answer to that question. How long would you be protected? All very important questions, all that we'll need to get answers to in the next several months and years. When we think of the new variant, there are four things we concern ourselves with. Is it more transmissible? Is it more pathogenic? Does it escape natural immunity? Does it escape vaccine immunity? the answer to those 4 questions. Yes, the 501v2 variant looks like it's more transmissible. No, it doesn't look like it's more pathogenic. It doesn't seem to be causing more severe disease. More people are infected, but not necessarily more severely. Third, yes, this virus seems to be able to escape natural immunity. And the 4th one, we don't know the answer, whether it escapes vaccine immunity.